Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear friends. I pray you're all well. Allah bless you all. Okay, let's start. Al-Fatiha. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وامنحنا يا ربنا علما وعملا وقربا يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم زدنا ولا تنقصنا وأكرمنا ولا تهنا وأعطنا ولا تحرمنا وآثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا وأرضنا وارض عنا يا كريم. So, Alhamdulillah, Allah has blessed us with this beautiful surah, Surah Al-A'raf, that talks about human nature. You know, this is the relevance of the Quran to every person and every society and every time, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the summary or a deep and precise look at humanity in general. There are some who believe in who behave in one way, and some who behave in in another way. But we see their motives, we see their, the decision-making processes, and we see where their choices lead them. So it's a perfect book of guidance, because it shows us you do this, you make this choice, this is your end. You make this choice, you do this, this is where your destination will be. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us many examples so far of people who were unfortunate enough to decide to not believe, right? And they saw miracles, they were presented with sound logical proofs, everything any fair-minded person would need to make him think, well, yeah, this is true, I should believe in it, I should align myself with God and amend myself to be in line with God's will, and it's enough. But these people, they got these messages and they chose not to believe in them. They chose to be antagonistic towards their prophets, their messengers, and to the believers, and it led to their own harm and destruction. And then we saw in the recent, so we've seen the story of the Prophet Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam with his people, the Prophet Hud, the Prophet Salih, the Prophet Lut, and the Prophet Shu'aib alayhi salatu wasalam ajma'in. And we saw where the actions led them. So here, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us an understanding that guidance comes to people. Some choose to believe and some reject it. And then in order to bring those people who reject it back in line, Allah sends them difficulties. So some people get the message and they turn back to God, and others ignore it. They continue to ignore it. So then Allah changes that difficulty into ease, and they think, yeah, well, c'est la vie, life's easy and at times, and life's difficult at times. Whereas they miss the whole point of the reminders, and then when the destruction comes, it's too late. So we saw examples of this. So as a summary of all that's been mentioned before, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the next verse to summarize what's happened, as Abu Sa'ud puts. تلك القرى نقص عليك من أنبائها. We have narrated to you, O Prophet, some of these stories of those societies. وَلَقَدْ جَاءَتْهُمْ رُسُلُهُمْ بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ فَمَا كَانُوا لِيُؤْمِنُوا بِمَا كَذَّبُوا مِنْ قَبْلُ فَمَا كَانُوا لِيُؤْمِنُوا بِمَا كَذَّبُوا مِنْ قَبْلُ. Surely their messengers came to them with clear proofs, but still they would not believe in what they had already denied. And we look at this translation. كَذَلِكَ يَطْبَعُ اللَّهُ عَلَى قُلُوبِ الْكَافِرِينَ. This is how Allah seals the hearts of the disbelievers. So we start with this opening word, tilka. So it's pointing to a group of things, of non-rational things, because it's talking about cities, densely populated cities. But it also points to something that's far away, right? It's a demonstrative pronoun, points to something far away. So tilka, so almost as though it's saying they're far, i.e. far in the past. Those, but then if you look at the context of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts it, that it's soon, just like it's presented, it's framed as though one event happened just after the other, and that happened just after the one before it, and it's framed that way so we don't see a massive gulf in time between us and them. What can happen to them can happen to people in our time. That's how it's put. So the way we understand tilka then is that they're far away, they're distant, they're far from any good, and they're far from the potential that they could have reached, but they're far because they were so bad. Tilka al-qura, those distant, you could say, those distant populated, densely populated cities and civilizations. Naqussu alayka min anba'iha, we're telling you over and over time about their particular stories. And from naba, it's news that is consequential, news that is really significant news of events that have a huge impact on the lives of people, the lives of those involved, and then the lives of those who hear about them, because they can draw huge lessons. And as they say in Arabic, ibar and ivat. And ibra comes from the word abara, to cross a bridge. So you use something to conclude another thing, you draw a conclusion, it's like you've crossed a bridge. And this idat, reminders, and that's what guidance is. There's no point reading a book of guidance if you're just gonna, on a fact-finding mission without opening yourself up to the truth of it, right? And so that's why not everyone who reads the Quran, historically and in our time, not everyone benefits, because some people are closed off, they do not wish to benefit. So here he's saying, Allah's telling the Prophet, we've told you all of these things as a way of tasliya for the Prophet, consolation for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the believers, telling them that the difficulties you're facing, this isn't the end of the road, this isn't the end of the story. Look at the end of these people who wronged, who caused corruption in the land. Look how they ended up. Right? So you're in the middle of a difficulty and a test and a trial, and it will come to its conclusion. And like with the believers, you will win. Right? This is how it's working. So, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَلَقَدْ جَاءَتْهُمْ رُسُلُهُمْ بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ. So Imam al-Biqai says, it's almost as though someone asks, well, okay, all these people, and they were killed, and should they really have been killed? I mean, did they get enough warning? And so then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, by God, I swear by God, tremendous messengers came to them, جَاءَتْهُمْ. So all these groups had messengers come to them, bil bayinat, with, it's almost as though the messengers are surrounded and wrapped in clear proofs, absolutely undeniable clear proofs, so clear that they're speaking out, they're shouting out, we are proofs. If something's obviously look at the metaphor here, right? That something that's opaque, you cannot see through. So what's beyond it isn't easily visible. But something is clear, you can see exactly what's beyond it, right? In Arabic, the word bayyin literally means apparent, right? Something that's easily seen. So you could say clear in that sense, right? But it's absolutely clear proofs, right? And so no, they didn't have an excuse, right? Or we didn't know, or we had insufficient information. Allah Azza wa Jal sent to them the best people of their times, right? Or maybe we Sayyidina Lut alayhi salatu wasalam, Sayyidina Ibrahim is superior, even though they were contemporaries. But Allah sent them these messengers, the best of their, these tribes, and coming to them and saying, this is what you should believe in. But they chose not to. So then he says, فَمَا كَانُوا لِيُؤْمِنُوا بِهَا لِيُؤْمِنُوا بِمَا كَذَّبُوا مِنْ قَبْلِ. So he said, so they were not going to believe, right? In no way, shape or form would they believe. They chose not to believe. And it's a very strong negation here, this with the lam al-juhud. فَمَا كَانُوا لِيُؤْمِنُوا بِهَا. They were not going to believe at all. بِمَا كَانُوا كَذَّبُوا مِنْ قَبْلِ. So here he says, بِمَا كَانُوا كَذَّبُوا مِنْ قَبْلِ. He translated as in what they had already denied. Right, but there's a bit of a discussion on this. Abu Sa'ud says that بما كانوا كذبوا من قبل, because he says, because it's valid reading, because they had denied just before. So Abu Sa'ud says that these people, they had denied and disbelieved before the messengers even got there. How so? Because they'd heard of these past events, right? So primarily speaking about the people of after the Prophet Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam, but they had heard there was this civilization of Ad, the civilization of Thamud. These people, a prophet came to them, told them about God, told them to leave idolatry, and they didn't, so they were destroyed. These huge events, if you think about the people who survived them, the prophets and then the believers and their descendants, that's the thing they're going to take away, right? Primarily that they disbelieved in God and then they were destroyed. So that's the piece of information that's most likely, along with news of their destruction, that's most likely to be transmitted, through the ages. So they may, these people may not have had all the details that the Quran's giving, but they had the general message, and yet they still disbelieved. And they thought, well, we don't care. In their minds, they made their minds up that they won't believe. That's how Abu Sa'ud understands. Others have a slightly different take. Like Sayyid Tantawi says that the messengers came with the proofs, but these people had decided to disbelieve before the proof even presented itself before them, right? Before they even saw the proof, they thought, we are not going to believe. No, they'd made their minds up. So it's as though as soon as the prophets came, these people just surprised them with their disbelief. No, we don't want to believe. We disbelieve. And they remained that way. They continued to be that way. That's another understanding. There are other positions that before the destruction. That's also a third position. Abu Sa'ud's position is great, as is the next one I mentioned by Sayyid Tantawi, and Imam Bikhari also mentions that. So this is what happened. Prophets came. Allah summarizing, the state of many of humanity. Prophets came with proof. They rejected, and then they were destroyed. Even though before that they knew that others have been destroyed for the same thing. كَذَلِكَ يَطْبَعُ اللَّهُ عَلَى قُلُوبِ الْكَافِرِينَ. And no less than that, in that amazing, significant way, does Allah place a stamp on the hearts of the disbelievers. Yatba'u, present tense, again and again and again. Who is this? As I've said previously, it's the people who choose to disbelieve again and again and again and again and again, and it become the disbelief and rejection of prophets and proofs becomes their natural way, their habit. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishes them with a seal on their hearts. So it's very difficult after that. And this is a punishment. This is an end state. And when they're all going to be destroyed, or when they're condemned, right? And so at that point, when the seal is there, it's very difficult for any sort of reminder or any sort of light to penetrate past that into the heart. Initially, when the guidance came and the prophets came, there's nothing blocking it except for their own choices and the sins that they committed just voluntarily. They committed those sins. That wasn't strong enough to place a barrier between the reminders that the prophets gave and the guidance that the prophets gave. But their hearts, when they were sealed, that was it. And eventually, because they rejected so much, the seal is placed, so they can't believe now, no matter what comes to them, and then they're deserving of their punishment. So that's why they were destroyed, and that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did it for most of these people. So what's the reason given? Why did it happen? Because they're kafirin. قلوب الكافرين. Their rejection, their hiding the truth after knowing that it's the truth, that is what led them to this punishment. And this is what they got. This is what they got. So, who are they dealing with? Allah, the Supreme King. And they didn't really put that into their equation. They put their own petty desires before that, right? Allah protect us. So then he says, وَمَا وَجَدْنَا لِأَكْثَرِهِمْ مِنْ عَهَدٍ وَإِنْ وَجَدْنَا أَكْثَرَهُمْ لَفَاسِقِينَ. And so he says, we did not find most of them true to their covenant. Rather, we found most of them truly rebellious. So this word ahad, so it's an ahad is an extremely strong pledge, a promise that you make, and it's one that you say, I'll keep going back to it, I'll stay on top of it. Look, I've said this, trust me, I won't break it, I'll keep doing this, right? So keep going back to it. That is an ahad. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we didn't find most of them to have an ahad, meaning that the pledges that they made, they couldn't stick to them. They didn't stick to them. They didn't have the loyalty. So there's a couple of interpretations of this. One interpretation, one interpretation, وَمَا وَجَدْنَا لِأَكْثَرِهِمْ, we did not find. So it's as though وَجَدْنَا, from wajada, to find, after looking. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he knows everything, but rather the indication here seems to be that, Allah didn't just judge them based on His knowledge before giving them a chance to make their choices. They were given their choices, they were given ample opportunities, and yet they breached the covenants that they made. They decided not to uphold them. So he said, and we did not find most of them to have any sort of loyalty to their promise. Most of them did not stick to their promise. And so who are we talking about here? One position, Abu Sa'ud says, is talking about the previous people. The people of, the previous people who've been mentioned before, and those who were destroyed, they didn't have an ahad. So what is the ahad here in this situation? So Abu Sa'ud said it's their prayers when they were being punished and tried after initially rejecting. This happens. This happened with Quraysh. Like we see in Surah Al-Dukhan, رَبَّنَا اكْشِفْ عَنَّا الْعَذَابِ, when they were saying, oh Allah, remove the punishment from us. So this is what they were doing. When the difficulties came, they prayed and, oh Allah, please. You know what happens? Like they would say when you're going out to sea, don't call on any idols, only call on Allah. And when they were really desperate, they'd call on Allah, and we'll do this and we'll do that, and we'll be true believers. And then as soon as the difficulties lifted, back to square one. So Abu Sa'ud says most of them didn't have an ahad, this loyalty and the ability to follow up on what they pledged. And then, so what about the rest of them? Did some of them have it? Abu Sa'ud says no. They were so bad that they didn't even bother making a pledge to him. Right? And so that's what they were like. And then talking about those who destroyed then. So then the other position is, and Abu Sa'ud's position is quite strong, right? The other one is saying that most of them is referring to humanity, and that most of humanity don't fulfill this covenant. The covenant that alastu bi rabbikum, when He gathered our souls and He said to our souls, when our souls were saying Him, am I not your Lord? And they said, yes, to this we testify. And when it comes to the dunya, the reminder is sent. Most people choose to reject. So then what is the ahad here? What's the pledge, the covenant? It's iman and good deeds, belief and good actions, and most people can't stick to that. And if you look at humanity, most people are like this, right? Most people reject God and turn away from Him. He said, وَإِن وَجَدْنَا أَكْثَرَهُمْ لَهُ. So the in and the la before fasiqeen together are one of the ways of highly emphasizing a statement. So it says, and وَإِن وَجَدْنَا, just like we said, almost like saying we didn't find any of them except to be like this. He said, so we certainly found most of them to be fasiqeen, those fisk to come out of, something like the circle of obedience to God. And he said we found most of them to be fasiqeen, most of them who don't obey God and they turn away from God and they disobey God. And that's what most of them are like, right? They make these choices. And it's really unfortunate if you look at what God does for us and what Allah gives us constantly, the blessings and the iman that we have. It's just inconceivable that people would do this, right? So until now, so then the verses of talking about I've talked about these these civilizations that have been destroyed. We've been told about the sunnahs of God, right? The way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deals with his creation, those who are destined for success and those who are destined for perdition. And it's shown us something about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests his servants with ease and difficulties. All of this in the end is to make clear which way is right and what should be followed and which should be avoided. And like I said, there's consolation in this to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the believers of his time who were suffering at the time at the hands of Quraysh. And then Imam al-Biqai has something interesting here. Imam al-Biqai, he says that I'll just quickly do it from the book. He says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first, after telling about Shu'aib, and he goes on to the Prophet Musa. So we said that it was chronological. Some of the ulama have said, like in Surah Al-Qasas, where the father-in-law of Sayyidina Musa, the man who becomes his father-in-law, some of the ulama have said that he is the Prophet Shu'aib. There's a difference of opinion on this, and there are a very strong position in Tafsir that indicates no, it wasn't him, right? And that's why I'm convinced of that it wasn't him. The Quran doesn't mention it. There isn't sufficient proof for it. So then we go from all of these stories, the final one being the story of the Prophet Shu'aib, to the story of the Prophet Musa, and dealing with Fir'aun and his people. So now it's like those stories have been mentioned in a general way. The prophets came, we saw repeated statements that the prophets said, and then now we're getting a detailed analysis of one aspect of the story of Musa. And if we start right when Musa alayhi salatu wasalam went with his proofs, the birth and his growing up and leaving Egypt, none of that's addressed here, because what's significant here is this point. And because why? Because the story of Pharaoh contains things to reflect on, that Allah took him and seized him in the end, but before that he was given times of ease and he was given punishments, the 9 signs that the 9 signs that the Quran refers to, and the 9 punishments that they got, which or the 9 signs that Musa got, which were, firstly it was the staff, Asa. The second, his hand, it would go incredibly white. The third was the years of drought. The fourth was the loss of fruits, the diminishment in their fruits. The fifth was the storms. The sixth were locusts, then lice, then frogs, and then blood, right? And the water turning to blood and stuff. And so these were the things that they were tested with. So once again, so we're getting a detailed description of the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, giving them difficulty and then ease after that. And then, because they refused to believe, this sudden grip, this sudden punishment where they were all drowned, and the seals were placed on their hearts. They chose not to believe, and then they were all drowned. And so this is something really significant. And so we're going to see the story unfold from this point. So it says, ثُمَّ بَعَثْنَا مِن بَعْدِهِ مُوسَى. Then moreover, so the thumma here is used not to talk about time, but significance. Moreover, look at the story of Musa. Look at what happened between Musa and Fir'aun. And Fir'aun was given a long time some of the ulama say, like, 40 years. Look at what happened to Fir'aun. So it says that then after a long time we sent after them Musa bi ayatina, Musa with our tremendous signs, and primarily talking about the staff on the hand, but obviously the others are included in it. Ila Fir'auna wa mala'ihi, to Fir'aun. Fir'aun was the title, and just like the Romans referred to their ruler as Caesar, and other civilizations had their own terms, the title of the native Egyptians for their ruler was Fir'aun. And the ulama say that this is based on the Christian and Jewish sources, but there was about 400 years between Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam and the time of Musa alayhi salam. So what happened is, because Yusuf alayhi salam was favored in his time by the ruler, and those rulers were not native Egyptians, they referred to their ruler as king, which the Quran talks about in Surah Yusuf, whereas the Bible is incorrect, saying they referred to that ruler as Pharaoh. Anyway, so then what must have happened is there must have been an uprising, and the native Egyptians took over. Right, so therefore the descendants of Yaqub, the Bani Israel, went from a position of being favored in their society to being enslaved, and that continued, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to put an end to it. So he said, we sent, just after those previous peoples, we sent Musa with our tremendous amazing signs to Fir'aun and Mala'ihi, the Mala' we talked about before, these people who fill people's eyes because of how important they seem. But they're the people, the court of Musa, the people who helped or the court of Fir'aun, the people who helped Fir'aun rule. Obviously the ruler, the emperor, he doesn't do everything, he just commands and others carry things out. So there are ministers who have responsibilities, and so these people, they helped him rule. So what happened? Musa alayhi salatu wasalam went with these signs, فَظَلَمُوا بِهَا. So dhulm, so they did dhulm, and they wrongfully rejected them. So dhulm is to put something in other than its proper place, or to treat something other than the way the way it deserves to be treated. So what they did is they did فَظَلَمُوا, and then this biha, the ba say, the ulama said that the ba in the biha implies the word kufr as well, because the way the word kufr is used is with a ba, and zalamu usually isn't used with a ba. It's something called tadmeen in Arabic, but that's what's happening. For zalamu wa kafaru biha, so they wronged, they did dhulm, and they showed other than the appropriate response, and they disbelieved in those signs. And then Allah gives us a summary of what's to come. Fanzur, look then, O Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, O ayyuhal aqil, O you who can understand, look, kayfa kana aqibatul mufsidin, the aqiba, the end result, right, the end point, how did they turn out? Who? The mufsidin, those who cause corruption in the land. Look at what happened. Look what happened to them. But not just what happened, but how it happened. So look at the whole thing. They were given the time to make their choices. They made the wrong choices, and then eventually when the punishment came, كيف كان عاقبة المفسدين, how did they end up making their choices? How did that play out? Look how they were destroyed. And this, you'll see this is mentioned twice now in this surah. It's mentioned in Surah An-Naml as well, that the aqibah of the mufsideen, those who cause corruption and destruction in the land and harm to others, they don't get away with it. They never get away with it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching. So then we go into the story of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, when he's appeared as a messenger to Fir'aun. So he says, وَقَالَ مُوسَى يَا فِرْعَوْنُ إِنِّي رَسُولٌ مِّن رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Subhanallah. So clearly, so this part of the story is relevant to the lessons that are being taught. That's why the whole story is not being mentioned. You'll find that a common thing in the Quranic narrative of stories, that Allah gives us what's needed at the time it's needed. And that's why all the stories just don't go from beginning to end. So he said, and then so Musa said, Ya Fir'aun. He addresses him with his title, because that's what he was, the ruler. But then he says, Inni, with high emphasis. Now clearly, Musa alayhi salatu wasalam grew up in the palace of Fir'aun. And Alam nurabbika fina walida, when Fir'aun says to him, didn't we raise you as a child? And so there is this familiarity, and Musa alayhi salatu wasalam just knows how impetuous Fir'aun was and what a tyrant he was. Yet this familiarity they had with each other, despite Musa alayhi salatu wasalam having been away for 10 years, it was a downfall of Fir'aun, because he still looks down at Musa, right? Not seeing his great rank and worth. So it didn't work. So, it caused him harm, right? So anyway, he says, Inni Rasulun, I am a tremendous messenger. Trustworthy, knowledgeable, true, the perfect messenger for you, right? Strong, right? Because sometimes, the people of batil and the people who do wrong, they're tyrannical and they're forceful and vehement, and so you need someone who's strong, who can speak back to them and lay down the truth as it is. So he said Rasulun, so he's amazing in and of himself. That's what we know. And then he says Mir Rabbil Alameen, from the Lord and the benefactor and the being who gives the blessings to all, but the master, the Lord of all living things, all intelligent beings, right? So everything, but there's a focus on men and jinn here in this word, Alameen. All of them. He's the Lord of all of them, Min Rabbil Alameen. And this must have upset Fir'aun, because he thought, and he was going around making the claim that he is God, right? And he is the Lord of everything. So Sayyidina Musa just not only took him down a peg, that you're not God, you're a human being, but in your slavehood to God, you're equal to everyone else, in the sense that you're all slaves of God. Yes, in the concept of Iman and Taqwa, there are people who are slaves and closer to God. Not in that, we're not talking about that context. We're talking about, who has a master, and all created beings have a master, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In that context, you're equal to everyone else, in the sense that you have a master. This must have upset Fir'aun. So Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam continues, حقيق على أن لا أقول على الله إلا الحق قد جئتكم ببينة من ربكم فأرسل معي بني إسرائيل. So it is fitting, obliged to say nothing about Allah except the truth. Indeed, I have come to you with the clear proofs from your Lord, so let the children of Israel go with me. So he's saying it's fitting, it's right, it's appropriate that he can only say the truth about God and only ascribe the truth about God to God, and he can't make anything up. And this is the general way of the God-fearing. But Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, being a messenger, it's a strong obligation for him, right? So this is what he's saying, that Allah aqula ala Allahi illa al-haq, even use the supreme name, about Allah, only the truth, right? And then he said, what is it? قَدْ جِئْتُكُمْ بِبَيِّنَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ, and I've brought to you a tremendously clear, evident sign from your Lord again, right? So he's proving that he's their Lord, he's their master, he's their creator, he has authority over them by sending proofs and miracles. He's doing all of that. So Sayyidina Musa says, I'm a messenger, I have a message, and I have the proof to back it up with. So it's as though it's more than enough, all of this, and you'll see it. So send Bani Israel with me. Stop subjugating them. You've enslaved them and you're mistreating them, killing their children, their boys, and all sorts. Stop these heinous actions, right? And surrender them over to me, so he can take them out and lead them to a better life. This is what Sayyidina Musa was saying. But Fir'aun was likely still upset that he he wasn't recognized as being a quote-unquote God, right? Clearly he's not. So we see his response, where he demands to see the proof, and inshallah ta'ala we will look at that next time. But do reflect on these verses. There's a lot here, and it tells us a lot about the difficulties people face in all times, and they're particularly pertinent in our time. And the last few pages of the Quran that we've covered have been very relevant, very, very relevant indeed. Okay, Allah bless you all. We'll stop here. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.